G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video on rifle cleaning. Now it's a video I have sort of, well listen, it's going to take a fair bit to go through. I want to break it up into at least two parts and we'll see how it goes. But first of all would be about cleaning and the different forms or different levels of rifle and barrel cleaning. And then I'll in the second half of the video, talk about what I actually do. As I don't think what I actually do is the best way to do it by any means, it's just what I do. And I suppose as the front half of the video will start to explain, it's a little bit horses for courses, but let's dive into what I'm talking about. With rifle cleaning, and largely for the majority of rifle cleaning, we're talking about barrel cleaning, talking inside the barrel, the actual cleaning the rifling, cleaning the chamber, cleaning the rifling. And there's, I suppose, the two extremes of this is you will get some people who literally never ever clean the barrel at all, and their rifle shoot okay. Some professional shooters that will never ever clean their barrel. To the opposite side of the extreme, competition shooters that literally one shot clean. Their aim is to end up with a 5-shot or an 8-shot clean, but they start the process and it is for up to 100 rounds sort of thing, and I don't know the finer details there, but many rounds of 1-shot clean and then going to 2-shot clean. So much more about cleaning than shooting. Well, that's what that day would be about. But I suppose both ends of the spectrum. And I suppose I'm here to say right now, neither one of them is right and neither one of them is wrong. They are, as I said, horses for courses, and I suppose I'll try and break that down a little bit. If I come back more into the middle of the spectrum, then the two really obvious ways are some people who clean their barrel thoroughly on a number of groups, or at some point or other they go through and make sure they get their barrel back to clean. And there's other groups of shooters which I'm more in the middle of, where I will do very light cleaning. I want to run the barrel in what I is called equilibrium, which is a point where the carbon fouling, and I suppose we're talking about when you shoot a rifle, you have the gases and the carbon, the burnt powder that's forcing down the barrel, and you have the copper projectile, or whatever material that projectile is, largely copper or lead, pushing down the barrel, and there's deposits of both those being left in there, plus a whole heap of heat. And I run what I'm doing is running where the equilibrium, I should say, or is what I'm talking about, rather than what I'm doing, is where the simple logic of that is that every time a bullet goes down the barrel, it pushes stuff out with it, and it leaves a little bit there. So if you can get equilibrium to the perfect place, it's cleaning itself. It leaves a little bit, it pushes out a little bit. It leaves a little bit, it pushes out a little bit. It leaves a little bit, it pushes out a little bit. And if you get it just right, why would that ever change from shot to shot to whether it was 1 round or it's 3,000 rounds? Why would it ever change? There's reasons for it changes. There's reasons for things happening there, and there are reasons why that logic isn't necessarily going to work for you. But then the other side of it is that yes, every time you fire something, you're doing a little bit more fouling, and you fire again, and it doesn't take away as much as it puts down. So to an incremental level, you're constantly getting a dirtier and dirtier and dirtier barrel until you clean it. So the logic of the competition guys now, and I suppose there's another side to competition, but let's go into this bit to start off with. The logic to that side of competition is they're going to shoot a match or a day or the weekend or whatever it is, and whatever level they're cleaning to. And they will largely tell you that's about the accuracy that we're really trying to achieve. The more cleaning about more accuracy. I wouldn't completely agree with that, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. But that is that every time a round goes down there, it lays some material in, and although you need some fouling shots, most, not all, but most guys will go with they need 1 or 2 or 3 fouling shots to get the barrel to where it's at the place where the load development's done for, and then they can do whether that's 5, and some will shoot, yes, just 5, and then thoroughly clean it. Others will shoot a match, which will be 50 or 60, and then clean it. Others will shoot a day and then clean it, or a weekend and clean it, and that might be 80 to 100 rounds. But then they clean it thoroughly. Their logic is that they want to start from the place they did the load development, but their logic is the clean barrel is the most accurate barrel. And although they are set up to be able to run X amount of rounds, if they left it, it would then start to shoot worse. And in some cases, that's going to be the case. You will find in the competition side of things, one of the things that's going on with the competition guys is they are trying to win. So they're doing everything they can. In some cases, wearing the right color jocks. In other cases, cleaning the barrel to another level. They're doing everything they can to win. Now, it isn't just the right color jocks I'm talking about with cleaning the barrel by any means. It means if they've done their load development for a clean barrel, that's where it's going to shoot the best for them. If they have, and there's other things going on here, if they have where they are starting to get too much build-up because of the powder they're using, some powders will foul more, some copper will leave more, some barrels foul more. There's all sorts of reasons why this can really happen. You can have a barrel that is starting to foul up, and it'll start to shoot badly. I would sort of counter that a little bit with, if you're going to win at the end of the competition, I would think is where it matters the most. And if you're at 100 rounds and it's shooting really well, why wouldn't that go to 200 rounds and shoot really well? Why wasn't that shooting nice at the end of that day? So I have that's me, the equilibrium barrel man talking, but you still get that there is a sound logic attached to probably some, I wouldn't call it dogma, attached to the competition guy's head. They need to do everything. They need to have all the same bits and all the right bits and pieces. They need to have it all the bases covered, because as I've mentioned in other videos, this is also about confidence. This is also about making sure that I know as much as they can it's going to do the right thing. I've done everything I can to make this rifle do as well as it can, to make my competition work as well as it can. So cleaning something thoroughly, that has some merit to it, so I fully understand it. And like I said, it's horses for courses. And I suppose while I'm on that cleaning to an extreme level, as I said, there's some places which will go to one shot clean. And in this sort of cleaning, we're not just talking about running a mop down it or a patch down or a bit of oil down, that sort of stuff. No, we're talking the whole lot, whether that's running into the likes of the solvents, okay, where they're actually softening the carbon and the copper, and they're pushing out, soaking it overnight, that sort of stuff, to paste, actually barrel paste, where they're rubbing an abrasive through the barrel, only taking a little bit of material out, but yeah, taking a little bit of material out to get to where the barrel is perfectly clean, using bore scopes to look for that dirt and see every bit of stuff they can to get it as clean as they can. If you're in the world of, and I suppose a bit of my video is about the guys who've just got a rifle or have just started to always done a little bit of hunting and not done much with their rifles and now going to precision, to whatever level it is where you're trying to figure it out for you, there is a bit of a trap to look at either one of the extremes. The never clean it, no, is not something I'd recommend. There's more going on than that, and I'll get more into that conversation a bit. The clean it way too much, because, and this is the trap I'm talking about, because the best guys with the best groups that shoot the absolute best, they clean the absolute most, so more cleaning must be better. And no, that's not the case. As said, there can be other things that are going on there, but it's not all straightforward with lots of cleaning. I suppose listen, what I'll go now into the real negatives of too much cleaning. There is the other side of which goes into less cleaning and equilibrium and all that sort of stuff. But let's just go with cleaning itself and what's going on. The main negatives of too much cleaning. I suppose there's a very subtle one of once you go to putting bore paste inside your barrel and brushing that through or pushing that through to actually abrasively clean the last bits of carbon out. There is a logic that, okay, you're wearing your barrel out a little bit with taking a little bit of barrel off, a little bit of barrel life off to push that carbon out. In truth, not in any practical sense is that the case. The competition side of things means that barrel's life is only while it's extremely pristine. So it doesn't get to 2/3 worn and get changed out. It gets changed before that anyway, because it's about competition and you're doing everything you can. So the little tiny bit that barrel paste is going to do isn't a concern. What is a concern, and what is quite common for the people who haven't figured it all out, is the damage you can cause with a brush, with a push through. The damage you can actually cause. Now, I've mentioned a few times about the style of push through you use. For the likes of me, I'll tend to use a plastic coated or a carbon rod in whatever it is, so that it's not metal rubbing against metal inside when you're actually pushing your push through. I've got this rifle here for another reason, but you obviously take your bolt out, you've got it clean, and then you use lube or whatever it is with whatever solvent, and I'll go through some of those in a little bit. But on a mop or a patch, you push that through, and you're basically pushing up and pulling back as a rule. There's all sorts of different ways to do that as well. But you have this rod traveling through it, and this is probably the rod and the fittings on the end are probably the most damaging things for cleaning, and especially for guys who clean a lot. And that's even for some guys that think they're doing everything perfectly, but they can still run into problems. Now, what we're actually talking about is that both in the case of using especially the likes of a straight steel rod or even a Teflon or plastic coated rod, is you can end up in a plastic or in a coated rod, you can end up with little bits of that carbon and metal and stuff that you're trying to clean out get impregnated into that plastic. And as it rubs down here, if it touches anywhere in your rifling, then it becomes abrasive. It becomes a little bit of sandpaper that's going through there. Straight steel rods, especially the jointed rods with little lumps on, little joints between that sort of stuff, they are bits that are once again rubbing on your barrel. Largely rubbing in the middle of the barrel isn't so much of an issue, because it's, you know, where it touches and as you're pushing harder, the rod will tend to bend or twist a little bit and that sort of stuff, and touching there. But the rifling's quite sturdy in between there. It's at the tip, at the crown, super important, and it's at the throat, which is the main issues. And the biggest issue, which is why I've got this rifle here, I'll move this stuff out of the road, is that when you've got something like this and I'll pull that bolt out. When you've got something like this that has a cheek riser that's up a fair way, but a butt pad that's up a fair way, when you try and put a push rod through it, if I carefully go down there, find I can't get to there without rubbing in these bits and pieces. And that's probably one of the biggest things that causes damage. There's another thing which, I showed last time I did a cleaning video, and that's about bore guides, but plastic units that you can push in around where your bolt is, to stop gunk getting into your trigger and bits and pieces when you flush fluid through it and that sort of stuff. Put it in there to stop stuff getting into your trigger. When you put fluids and things down there, it runs out into your action, then runs into, whether it's your magazine or it's down into your trigger house, your trigger assembly or whatever it is, you can end up with gunk in there that you don't want in there. So not a bad idea for that. But I don't use them, and that's because of the way I clean my rifles. I don't use them, and I'll go into what I do later on. But what is actually going on there is that the more I hear about this, is what I've heard from talking to gunsmiths and to barrel builders and things like that, is that guys tend to think once you have something in here, that guides it, and then you can use whatever rod you want, and you can use it however you want, and you can rub it up and down, and it's not going to be problems. And that's a trick, because it isn't the case. Unless you have a very straight line of push here, when you bend this, if I get this straight through the center, and we know this straight in the center, but the handle's bent over here, this bit here can still be where it's rubbing on something. And that's a very common piece of damage, where because of a buttstock or a cheek riser, or you can't get this straight flow in there, is you end up where that rod is rubbing somewhere, and even when it's plastic coated, but it's used a fair bit. This is much more about the people who clean a fair bit. That can be rubbing and actually cause quite severe damage to the throat side of things. That's not uncommon at all. So I suppose, like I said, I'm not saying the bore guide system is not a terrible thing to use, but understand it's not a be-all end-all of fixing things. So be very careful about how it goes in through there. The other side, and the next most common piece of damage, is up at the crown. And that's it's largely really about gear that's not good enough. If you look on the end of a mop, and you can really feel it. If you can run your fingers back up, the same way you're going to pull a mop back out, and you can feel any sort of a sharp edge, any sort of bit that goes dunk on the way back out, that potentially, when you push it through and then pull it back, which, by the way, you should always push it all the way through and then pull it all the way back if you're doing that, not stopping halfway where you're crushing things in, where things that were like brushes and things that were laying over one way have to go back the other way. They end up getting broken off inside, and it's just not the right thing to do. Push right through, pull right back. Some guys will push right through, pull the brush off because they're concerned about the problem they've got in the end where it will dunk on the crown. But that sharp edge on the crown, or anything that you can feel if you run back through here, that can potentially touch on your crown. And yes, your crown is extremely hard, extremely sharp, or however it's cut, but hard metal. So how can it get damaged? Well, hard metal is like glass. And yes, glass is really hard to squeeze, but if you drop it, if you hit it with something hard, if you tap it, it can crack. Well, your crown's exactly the same. So it means you don't want anything to dunk about it. You don't want anything to dunk back against it. You don't want anything to tap on it, all that sort of stuff. So it's something to be very careful with. And I suppose I mention that simply because the guys who clean a lot, that's probably the biggest thing that they generally cause. Now, guys that are all sorted, it's all dead straight, they're using their ball guide and they've got it dead straight, or they're not using a ball guide like me, and they've got it dead straight, they go through there, then there is no negatives apart from the time you're spending. And like I said, if it's about preparation, it's about winning that championship, then that's pretty valuable time to spend doing that sort of stuff. So with the bore paste and the extreme solvents and all that sort of stuff, really, yeah, there's no negatives if you do it correctly. I just mentioned solvents and extreme solvents. There are some particularly copper solvents, but some solvents in general, which are awesome at cleaning barrels, but they are, they end up, or I suppose two angles. One is metal is metal. Super dry metal is on the edge of fragile. Actually having metal that has a tiny bit of lubrication in it is a far stronger piece of metal. It ends up where it's protecting itself. And whether that's the lubrication is sealing the pores or the grooves, or it's just protecting from corrosion, all that sort of stuff, a tiny light bit of oil is always what should be left in there when you're storing a barrel. But I mention that for two reasons. One is I have seen people who've over-cleaned, like brand new barrels that have been cleaned and cleaned and cleaned, like they're like trying to get, I don't know what out at that point, but trying to dry, that actually can cause more carboning, more fouling, more problems because they've just been cleaned when they didn't need to be cleaned. And that can also happen when they've been left dry or cleaned too thoroughly in the way of the dried right out and stored. But a bigger negative and more common negative that gunsmith sees in the way of damage to rifling out of guys that clean aggressively is by using aggressive solvents. I mean, the way of when you're a copper solvent particularly, but some of the solvents which you'll actually put in there soak the barrel overnight with this solvent so that then you can brush it all, clean it all out, brush it all out, and then mop it all out, do that sort of stuff. Some of those solvents end up, and I don't know if they start, but some of the process ends up in a hygroscopic form. Now, hygroscopic means it attracts moisture. It actually will draw moisture into itself. Moisture out of the air will draw into itself. And what that can end up with is this perfectly clean barrel that then is put away in the safe. A week later can have corrosion pits in it, actually doing damage by corrosion. So the only thing I would say, then I won't get further into brands or bits and pieces, but if you want to go aggressively down the solvent road, you need to go aggressively down removing the solvent road as well, lubricating, recoating, some form of protecting your barrel for some of those solvents. It isn't an uncommon problem. But as said, if you did the cleaning really thoroughly, and with all the right bits and pieces, so the rod, the mop, the jag, the whatever it is, didn't damage anything, and you make sure you get any of the aggressive solvents out, you make sure you get at least a light layer of a protective oil or anti-corrosion back in there, then yes, listen, there's nothing wrong with doing that to the barrel at all. And for some guys who are low developing, who are setting up for that form in competition, winning matters above everything, then there's no negatives to that. For me, there is, but let's go into the other side of barrel cleaning.